My parents met when they both worked for a department store called EST in Tallinn. My mother worked there as a bookkeeper, and my father had apparently an aptitude for sales. And the management of the store decided to try him out for some kind of training positions. So they sent him to the store in Kuressaare, Saaremaa. So that's how we ended up in Saaremaa. On one evening, the Soviet military arrived at our home and restrained my mother while they were waiting for my father to return home from work. When my father arrived, we were taken with a jeep, all three of us, to a prison. The reason that we were arrested was because my father was accused of allowing the employees to listen to the radios that were left in the storage within the store. Apparently they had a big storage house and there were some radios in there. During the Soviet occupation, it was illegal to have a radio or to listen to one. It would have been just before 1941 because I actually had my first birthday around that time, right? So, and I was taken with my mother to a women's prison. Some of the women told my mother that they had also had children at the prison, and that at one point a nurse will come and ask for your child to check their health. And said, when she leaves, you will never see your child again. So my mother had been forewarned, but however, it came to pass that one day a nurse did arrive, and she said that she needed to take me to have my health checked. Well, my mother, who at the time actually was expecting my brother, started to fight the nurse back. A guard was called in, and my mother was restrained while I was taken from her. And apparently she said at that point she fainted in the hands of the guard. And I was taken to to an orphanage that was for so-called military criminals or political criminals. In the meantime, my father was going to a tribunal, which was like a military court, which was pretty much a death sentence for most Estonians. But for some inexplicable reasons, he was let go. Now we're not quite sure what had happened, but he had heard through the grapevine that apparently the translator who had translated translated what he said to the Russians had said some things that were favorable to his release. At the time, my father was a very honorable man. Said, well, if I'm innocent, then you must also release my wife, because she would be innocent. So that meant that both my mother and father were able to leave the prison. Both of them survived. When they left the prison, they had, through friends, found out that most of the children from the orphanages had already been sent over to mainland Estonia to be put into railroad cars, and most of them went to Russia or Siberia. However, they were told that there are still some children left in some of the orphanages, mainly because the boats didn't stop going across to the mainland Estonia because of the German bombing in the Baltic Sea. So they stopped the transport. And so they had found through some friends, found a friendly nurse who knew where the orphanages were located. And in one of the orphanages, they were delighted to find me. And I apparently, according to the story, had become very withdrawn and angry and had retreated back to crawling after walking when my mother had found me. Had been taken from my mother. This was in 1941, yes, when we went back to Tallinn. After the Soviets had actually left Estonia, my parents moved back to Tallinn, and they went both back to work at the ETK. Uh, the fish were brought in to the store in large barrels, in trucks from the port to the store, and then they were returned back to the port as empty barrels. My father started to use that as a way to bring many Estonians out of Estonia. What he would do was, when these barrels arrived, he would put a couple families or couple people in these barrels. The barrels would go in the back of the truck with the lids on top, and in the front of the truck would be all empty barrels. Eventually, they became worried that there was going to be another Soviet occupation. And so my parents decided that they would leave also. And so one evening, we all went out also onto a fishing boat, and with several other Estonian families that left for Finland. Finland had made a treaty with the Russians, and some kind of peace treaty that if escaped Estonians were found, that they needed to be returned to Estonia. Where along with several other Estonian families, they again found another fisherman who was willing to take them to Sweden. Now, of course, these fishermen had to be, both the ones left Estonia and the ones for Sweden, had to be compensated quite richly, either with money, gold, or whatever people had to give them for them to risk taking these Estonians aboard. And so we set out on his boat for Sweden. However, at the time, there was quite a storm building up in the Baltic Sea. The fishermen spotted a Coast Guard coming towards us from the distance. And he realized that if we were caught, we would probably all be doomed. So he knew of a small island, and he says, I will drop you off on this island and come back for you. So he went to this small island, left us with some water and minimal supplies, and so we got off, and he left and said he would come back. It was an island that was covered with blueberries. So we drank the water and everybody ate blueberries. Now, the second day he didn't come back. And some of the people started to suspect that since he'd already been paid, why would he risk taking us to Sweden? You know, he had no incentive really. However, he was an honorable man, and he did indeed come back on the third day and took us to Sweden. However, the Swedish government had also made a pact with the Soviets to try to stay neutral and with friendly terms on them. And eventually, the Russians started to ask back for its citizens. And the first batch that left Sweden, I understand, were Estonian soldiers who were promptly executed when they arrived in Estonia by the Soviets. And so my parents, of course, feared that they were going to face the same fate. So then again, they looked at that they would have to again leave everything behind and found another country. My father, along with several other Estonian men, left first for Canada from Sweden, where they would, when they arrived in Montreal, Canada, they would seek work and also a place to live, and then they would send for their families. My entire class, and including the teachers, and my brother's class, and including his teachers, all came to the train station on the morning we left for Göteborg to come to Canada. And they gave me a beautiful painting of a girl who the children said had reminded them of me. The day that was on the picture was 1st of March 1950. So all the children and all the teachers waved goodbye as their train pulled out of the station in Svaneholm, and we left for Canada.